So, Peter, I'm going to introduce you. Peter Tyler is a psychologist, he's a psychotherapist, he's a doctor of theology, and he's a professor of theology and spirituality at St. Mary's University in London. And Peter has written extensively on the dialogues between spirituality and psychotherapy. He has written many books. I had the chance to read some of them. They're really beautiful and deep books about the subject. He studies most specifically some of the Christian mystics as St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and philosophers such as Edith Stein. And Peter today will bring us to a journey through one of the most beautiful texts of mystical poetry. It's called the Spiritual Canticle by St. John of the Cross. And at the end of his presentation, I will read it in Portuguese for you. Okay? So, Peter, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. You can all hear me clearly? Yes? Shall I begin?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, I can't see or hear anyone, so I'm just talking into the void. Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here, and I'd like to thank the Hermetic bridge builder, Raphael, who has brought together Brazil and England. Today, I'm at St. Mary's University, where Raphael is a student, and you're all very welcome here. This is your London home now, so if any of you want to come and visit me in London, you're more than welcome. And today, by some strange freak of nature, we have Brazilian weather, so it's nice and warm here. I hope it's warmer than São Paulo. What I'm aiming to do is to look at this spiritual canticle. We have just under an hour, and at the end of it, Paolo is going to read it to you in Portuguese. I apologize I cannot be with you in person, and hopefully if you have another conference next year, I would love to get an invite. That's a hint. And today is the first day of our term at St. Mary's, so I had to be here this morning to register our new wonderful students. I must say, we've got some fantastic new students. The translators have kindly said they will interpret. Unfortunately, my English is not very good. I'm half Irish, so I do apologise to the translators, and I hope the translators will be able to follow my ramblings. What I have done is put the on the slides, on the PowerPoint, I put two things. One are the long quotes, and I believe that these have been translated into Portuguese, so that can help you as well. And the other thing is, because, as Julianne and Raphael made clear last night, this is a conference about image, symbol, going beyond words. So I'm using the images that you see here. These were commissioned in 1991 from the Carmelite sisters in Lebanon, Harissa in Lebanon. And they depict the spiritual canticle. They today hang next to John's tomb in Segovia in Spain. And I do recommend a visit there. Julian and I, for many, many years, have taken groups there. They are interesting icons, and they're well worth mulling over. I'm very happy for this PowerPoint to be available to participants. I think Raphael has a copy, so if Raphael wants to distribute the PowerPoint to participants for the images, you're more than welcome. The text of the talk isn't ready for public baptism yet, because I haven't finished working on it. So, but hopefully it will be published at some point soon. And one last thing, I don't know if we have any Jewish friends on this call, but happy Rosh Hashanah. to those Jewish friends, very important. It's the beginning of the holiest feast period of the Jewish nation today. And Julianne and I led a wonderful interfaith pilgrimage to Toledo last year of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And one of the important things about this conference is it is a step towards healing. And we very much want the healing of the nation. So I dedicate this talk to those who work for peace, and especially for those who are in war-torn areas of the world, especially Ukraine and the Middle East at this time. So to begin, the famous Bloomsbury critic Gerald Brennan once described St. John of the Cross as, quote, a man of two books. These books being the Hebrew Song of Songs and the Spanish Renaissance poetry of Garcilaso de la Vega. To this, we can add a third book, the popular street songs of his day. If you like, I'm not very good at popular music. I'm more a Bruckner man myself. But you could add the common during the intervals at home. We've been listening to Brazilian street music. It's been rather lovely. I felt like sambering. And these groups, these canciones, were the equivalent of Brazilian street songs today. I'll come back to those later on. And these three influences, the Jewish scripture, the Renaissance poetry, and the music of the street, combined in the mysterious crucible of John's imprisonment. This is a rather fanciful, I rather like it myself, it's a rather fanciful picture of the incarceration of John. I'm sure it wasn't like that. But it's an 18th century print, and the angels are playing rather beautiful 18th century instruments. And in the long, cold winter and hot summer of 1577, 1578, John was imprisoned by his own order. And here he mulled upon these three books and his own understanding of the medieval mystical theology, or let's use a bit of Latin. We paid a lot of money for this conference, so I'll use as much Latin as possible. The Theologia Mystica, which Julianne referenced yesterday when she talked about Augustine and the Triple Way. John had, in fact, won a scholarship at, a bit like Raphael, he'd won a scholarship for his essay at Salamanca University on Dionysius the Areopagite, who, again, Julianne referenced yesterday. He also understood that art was extremely important for describing the spiritual journey. Yesterday, you saw Julianne's book with Jung and Teresa of Avila. Now you see today my book with Teresa of Avila, this time squaring up to Ludwig Wittgenstein. And that was my doctorate. And Wittgenstein, I could talk for another hour. Perhaps if we have another conference next year, I'll talk about Wittgenstein. I know there's a lot of Wittgensteinians in Sao Paulo. And Wittgenstein wanted to police the boundaries of language. He wanted to be on the edge of language. And he famously said, what cannot be said can be shown, and what cannot be shown can be said. Sorry to the translators, I've gone off my script. But anyway, I'll come back onto my script shortly. And John realized this, that when you talk about the spiritual, and this, all of you who are therapists, counselors, psychotherapists, when you're with a client, and you're talking about the spiritual, you go beyond words. You go beyond what can be said. And when words fail, or as Wittgenstein said, when language goes on holiday, we have to use image, picture, symbol, icons. Raphael and Julien mentioned the importance of icons yesterday. So when we look at the spiritual canticle, it's almost like watching a film. I think John would have liked the cinema. Wittgenstein certainly did. You may have heard of the film star that Wittgenstein's favourite film star was someone you might have heard of. She's called Carmen Miranda. Have you ever heard of Carmen Miranda? Fruit on the top there. She was, you're looking very puzzled. She was Wittgenstein's favourite film star. And this is a quote from one of my fellow professors at Oxford, Colin Thompson. And I think you've got this in Portuguese, but I'll read it in English, unless someone wants to read it in Portuguese. Would someone want to read it? Paolo, could you read it in Portuguese? Do you have the Portuguese there? No? No, okay. Changes of speaker, audience, tense, location, large numbers of unrelated images, paradox, logical nonsense, constant uncertainty on the reader's part as to the exact meaning. The whole poem is constructed in this extraordinary manner. In parts, it is almost impressionistic in feel. In other parts, it seems to be using a 16th century equivalent of modern cinematographic, I can't even say it myself, technique. Flashbacks introduced without warning. Events implied rather than stated. Characters introduced in passing, focused on briefly, then discarded. Whilst the contemporary American writer, Constance Fitzgerald, whose work has been very important for me, and I will reference her a few times today, writes, because it brings together delight and suffering, happiness and death, the spiritual canticle is a mysterious text, difficult to interpret. To which she adds, apologies to the translators in your text, to which she adds, American spirituality is not at home with words like resting, tasting, ecstasy, seeing, delight, joy, and love. Perhaps Brazilian spirituality is, I don't know. When I come over there, I can find out. And as I read these lines, I'm reminded of a wonderful Scottish poet, Edwin Morgan, and on the right there is the extraordinary painting by Salvador Dali, Christ of St. John of the Cross, which usually hangs in Glasgow. It's at the moment it's also on holiday in Spain at the moment. They've let it out for the first time. And Edwin Morgan wrote, I have to tell you, John of the Cross called, said to remind you light and death once met. So when considering the spiritual canticle, we cannot separate consideration of the poem from the circumstances of its composition, beginning with John's imprisonment by his fellow friars in that eyrie high above Toledo. This is a painting that was done at the time of John's imprisonment by the famous Greek-Spanish artist El Greco. It's presently in Washington in the United States. But right in the center of the image, I haven't got a pointer there, but you can see on the right the ancient Moorish castle, the Alcazar. And then right in the center, you see the spire next to it. And then right next to that, that is the convent where St. John was imprisoned. If you go there today, you will see a municipal car park. Julianne and I went there last year with baseball-hatted youths with skateboards and old ladies enjoying the cool breeze from the vantage point. Yet even today, the roar of the waters below can be heard, and it does not take much imagination or effort to transport ourselves to the unspeakable confinement of John's cell, once used as a latrine, alternately boiling in the summer and freezing in the winter, with little light and little chance of escape. The circumstances of his imprisonment need not detain us. I'm very happy to talk about it afterwards if you want. But a sense of the conditions he endured can be heard in the testimony of one of his jailers, Juan de Santa Maria. He wrote many years after John's death, "During the time I was in charge, which was the latter part of his imprisonment, they brought him to the refectory 3 or 4 times with all friars present to receive the discipline," that's the lash, the whip, which they gave him with a certain severity. He never spoke, but rather bore it with patience and love. When this was over, they sent him back at once to his prison. Seeing his great patience, I felt compassion, and sometimes I opened the prison door after dinner and let him leave it to get some air in a room across from the little prison. That was John's means to escape, because John was actually a very good carpenter, so he managed to escape by those means. So this terrible imprisonment was the catalyst that triggered the remarkable explosion of creativity in the 35-year-old John. Most of you, I think, are Jungians, and you will understand that 35 is the time of transition. Jung spoke very eloquent on the subject in the stages of life. He said what was a truth will become a lie, what was a lie will become a truth. And certainly amongst my students, the ones in the mid-30s are the ones who often embark upon therapy training. It is the crucial time of transition, not only for John, but also for Teresa of Avila. They both went through this breakdown or breakthrough at this point. So we have as another one of his, it's not going on, as we have from another of his jailers, this account of someone who suffered very, very deeply in this position. I'm going to move on now because of the constrictions of time. So for those who are translating and have my text in front of you, I'm going to now move to the section that begins transformation in love. We had a conference 2 years ago on St. John of the Cross at St. Mary's, and we subtitled it John of the Cross, Carnal, Desire and Transformation. And you could say to some extent that John's approach to the spiritual journey is encapsulated in those 3 words. Carnal, his spiritual home, the place, what the Buddhists would call his Sangha, the place of where the enlightened people meet. You know, this is the Sangha today. We have the Sangha in Sao Paulo today. Desire. We've heard a lot already in this conference about eros. Desire is the dynamic of all human interactions. And as our Buddhist friends will agree. And thirdly, transformation, which Raphael talked about yesterday. I wrote down, I always write down his words. He had a wonderful quote. He wrote, I'm sure you remember, Raphael, transforming consciousness without ego, which I think is almost the motto for this conference. That necessary and restless movement of the soul, which John charts so precisely in this ecstatic poem. The final goal of this transformation for him is its ability to transform the person, again, as Julien said last night. He wrote, what God seeks, he being himself God by nature, is to make us gods through participation, just as fire converts all things into fire. Which sounds wonderful. But what is mysterious about John's poem? Oh, hello, can you hear me? What is mysterious about John's poem is it doesn't start in ecstasy. It doesn't start with the vision of the divine. It starts in agony. It starts in a wound. And these, as far as we understand, and scholars argue about this, what keeps them in business, it pays the mortgage. But as far as we understand, these are the first words that John wrote in that prison in Toledo. Where have you hidden, my love, and left me moaning? Like a stab you fled, like a stab you fled, having wounded me. I went out calling you, and you had gone. So I was just looking for the Spanish. And I don't think I have it here. Sorry about that. No, my edition, I just got this out of my office. Oh yeah, here we go. Bear with me a moment. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Hablo español, tristemente no portuguesa. ¿A dónde te escondiste, amado, y me dejaste congebido? Como el cierto oeste, habiéndome herido, salí tras ti clamando y eras ido. And all who are free tell me 1,000 graceful things of you, and all wound me more and leave me dying with a, I don't know what, that lies behind their babbling. Why, if you wounded this heart, don't you heal it? Unless you stole it from me, or carry off what you have stolen. And this is the picture of it from the nuns of Harissa. And I think this strange and terrible cry at the beginning of John's theology makes it so appealing to our current generation. When I started studying John 30 years ago, there wasn't a lot of interest in him. Now, he's very sexy. You know, everyone wants to study John. I've got about 5 or 6 doctoral students studying John. I examined a doctorate on him in Malta 2 days ago. And I think that's because he speaks to our time. You know, people say in England, I don't know about Brazil, but in England people say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. There's a loss of energy when it comes to organized religion, but there's an increase in energy when it comes to the spiritual. And I think that's one of the motors behind the present conference. So his theology begins with a wound, the sense somehow that God has left us, a sense of dissatisfaction or failure. Somehow we are imperfect, and what we seek cannot be found. But this is not an ordinary wound. This is a holy wound that lies at the heart of all human life. And again, for you Jungians, very archetypal. It's an archetypal moment. And I believe one of the reasons for John's renewed appeal to our generation is that once again we are understanding that at the heart of the contemporary world there lies a deep and festering and painful spiritual wound. And then, sorry for the interpreters, we're just moving on to the next quote. This is nicely put by the, I think, great American Jungian therapist, Robert Johnson, who I had the privilege to meet many years ago. If you don't know Robert Johnson's work, I do recommend it. And he wrote this sense that most Western people are like the ancient fisher kings. Each of them has, quote, blundered into something that is too big for them. They proceed halfway through their development and then drop it as being too hot. Often, a certain bitterness arises. Again, I'm a practicing therapist myself, and I'm sure many of you in your work will be familiar with that bitterness that a lot of people have towards the church and its abuses. Because, like the fisher king, they can neither live with the new consciousness they have touched, nor can they entirely drop it. As John said, why, if you wounded this heart, don't you heal it? And as you stole it from me, why do you leave it as it is? They're caught in a cleft there. And from this arises one of the first theological points of John's writing. I'm going to move on to that. And he writes, it is noteworthy. John is a scholastic. Teresa is a woman of the people. She speaks her heart. John is can be very austere, quite forbidding. He's actually a pussycat, but if you, when you first read him, he can be very intimidating. And by the way, at the end of this talk, my aim is not, well, if you want to go and buy the books of Peter Tyler, I'm delighted. But the aim of this talk is for you to go away and read John. Because I know lots of people, when they first pick up John, find him incomprehensible. And I hope at the end of this talk, you will look beyond the false image of John as the gloomy saint who is often called. So he writes, it is noteworthy that however elevated God's communications and the experience of his presence are, and however sublime a person's knowledge of him may be, these are not God essentially. Remember, as I said before, language goes on holiday. Anything we think is God cannot be God. God is always beyond. The great Welsh poet R.S. Thomas says, ours is such a fast God, always leaving just as we arrive. And I would say that anyone who says they grasp God has grasped an illusion. They have not grasped God. So nor are they comparable to him because indeed he is still hidden to the soul. Hence, regardless of all these lofty experiences, the person should think of him as hidden and seek him as one who is hidden, saying, where have you hidden? And that, I think, is the second aspect of John's idea here. It's that we shouldn't trust experiences of God. We should remember, what the moderns say, we should have a hermeneutic of suspicion with regard to these things. So having encountered this divine wound, he then says, we go out. So we have this wonderful dynamic spirituality. God descends to the wound, and then we go out, seeking my love, he writes in the 3rd verse. I will head for the mountains and for the watersides. I will not gather flowers, nor fear wild beasts. I will go beyond strong men and frontiers. Here is the nun's interpretation of that in the icon. And of course, this is very famously portrayed in The Dark Knight. I'm not going to quote all this. That can be your homework. I'm a professor. I have to set homework. So your homework can be to read The Dark Night of the Soul. One dark night, also written in the prison. One dark night, fired with love's urgent longings. Ah, the sheer grace. Oh, dichosa ventura. I went out unseen, my house being now all still. We leave the place of comfort, unseen. We leave our nice jobs. You know, we've got really good jobs, family, etc. And we leave it all up to go and train to be a Jungian analyst. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's expensive, it takes years, you know, you have to, it's an act of faith. We leave to find this strange, hidden God who has given us so much trouble by woundedness. And the shorthand for this is what John terms the dark night. It's not depression. Some of you say, oh, this guy, he's deluded. He's just talking about depressive illness. It's not depressive illness. John and Teresa were very familiar with mental illness. They called it melancholia, and both John and Teresa give very clear guidelines to distinguish mental illness from this spiritual process. This is a spiritual process. It cannot be reduced to the material. So we reach this point where there's only so much we can achieve by our own strength. We have to now move into a new place, the place of the guiding night. I'm going to skip again. Sorry, poor translators. I feel very sorry for you. We move to this place in which I entitled the talk, O Guiding Night. O night more lovely than the dawn. O night that is united, the lover with his beloved, transforming the beloved to her lover. O noche que guiaste, o noche amable más que el alborada, o noche que juntaste, amado con amada, amada en el amado, transformada. So we have in John's writing this systole and diastole, this constant action between God's irresistible loving action towards us and our response, our opening and preparing ourselves for God's action on us and in our lives. And John famously writes in his last work, The Living Flame of Love, it should be known, Professor William, it should be known that if anyone is seeking God, the lover, the beloved is seeking that person much more. I'll repeat that. Wonderful saying. It should be known that if anyone is seeking God, the beloved is seeking that person much more. Time is against us. So again, for the sake of those who are translating, I'm going to move forward now to the section that begins entering union. Hopefully one day you will get the full account of this talk. So, to recollect what we have discovered so far. John suggests that at the beginning of the spiritual journey, we are enveloped by dryness, darkness, and disorientation. We know there is more to life than we experience in our houses, families, careers, and relationships. But somehow it eludes us. It is always just beyond our grasp, beyond the horizon. As I've said, or as Thomas says, such a vast God, always before us and leaving as we arrive. At the heart of John's poem, and indeed, I would venture, to all spiritual search, is a paradox. On the one hand, we have a vision of overwhelming beauty. Beauty, hermosa, is the most used word by John. He's not the gloomy, apophatic mystic. He is the mystic of beauty. The beloved, the amado, the one. On the other hand, we have a feeling of despair, blackness, and disorientation. Where have you fled, beloved? You wounded me, and now I'm gone. As Sister Constance Fitzgerald puts it, those who decide to commit their lives to God frequently fail to realize that this very decision will activate an uncomfortable self-knowledge. An uncomfortable self-knowledge. That's what we're talking about. That's the key. And this is, I think, because our basic human anthropology puts us at odds with the vision we see. Now, this is noted and described in many traditions, not just in the Christian tradition. In the Sufi tradition, they talk about the nafs, the lower part of the self. The Buddhist tradition has the writings of the Abhidharma, which detail in minute and forensic fashion the delusions of self that lead us from enlightenment. And the Christian tradition, upon which John depends, draws upon the writings of the post-apostolic desert fathers and mothers, who outline struggles against the demons, the passions that distract us on our spiritual journey. So John notes that despite all this, we have the answers within us. And that, I think, my friends, is the great message of this poem, and I hope the great message of this conference. We have the answers within us. Our clients have the answers within them. We might think we're the great, gurus. They have the answers. I don't have the answers. I have their appearance. I do not have their reality. For although the seeker often feels that, quote, God is far off and hidden, as John says, within the seeker herself, he tells us, quote, you possess your riches, delights, satisfactions, holiness and kingdom, your beloved whom you desire and seeks. And that is what we heard last night from Julienne, that you get in Teresa, this vision of the castle, with all its wonders and riches, you said waterfalls, flowers, and birds. This is all within us. And as he states at the outset of the journey, you should never desire satisfaction in what you understand about God, but rather in what you do not understand about him. What is not understood about God is actually more important than what we understand about God. But we do not pursue this journey blind. The beloved, as you see in this icon, has left a trace in all creation. John is not a dualist or life denier. Despite the criticisms of his critics, he says that the divine is found, first of all, through the traces of love left in the woods and thickets. Hence the importance of beauty for John's poem. as we see in this beautiful picture. Pouring out 1,000 graces, he passed these groves in haste, having looked at them with his image alone, clothed them in beauty. And the wonderful Carmelite Constance Fitzgerald makes a wonderful link between this and Divine Sophia. Sorry to the translators, we've now moved to this section entitled, the next section on the three-direction desire. Julianne and I are members and founding members of a wonderful organisation in England called the Friends of Sophia. And if you want to know more about it, I'm sure Julianne will tell you all about it. We haven't planned a conference for next year. But what Fitzgerald does is she reclaims Sophia in John's writing. She writes, the love of divine wisdom as it grows and develops in life experience actually educates human desire. That is, affects a gradual transference of desire to Jesus Christ, the beloved Sophia. John writes with a profound insight about the agony and ecstasy of the journey of human desire and explains for us what kind of affective education is carried on by Divine Sophia over a lifetime. We educate people to contemplation, therefore, by consciously guiding the complex education of human desire as it is being influenced and affected by beloved Sophia in each one's life situation. And that, I think, is our work, my friends. You and I, everyone in this conference, when we work with our clients, we are educating them in human desire. And you know, we have a lot of forces against us. The forces are big commerce, the internet. The advertisers know this. The multinational companies, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, they know this. They know how to pervert and twist desire. All of us, I think, in our work deal with an addiction. In my country, there's a tsunami of addiction. An addiction is the perversion of desire. And I think, again, the importance of this conference, which is why I'm so excited that it's happening and, you know, it has my blessing, is because we are reclaiming desire. But John says that cannot happen through our own ego. If we use our ego to reclaim desire, we will lose everything. So at this point in the Canticle, he introduces the Holy Spirit with these amazing lines. I mean, this is what Colin Thompson said. This could do with a, you know, Francis Ford Coppola treatment, you know, it's Steven Spielberg. Detente, virto muerto, ben austro, que recuerdos los amores, aspira como muerto, y corran tus olores, y pasará el amado entre los flores. Desist, deadening north wind, come, warm wind of the south, which reawakens love. God, this is a monk. This is a austere friar. I mean, this is Southern, isn't it? Beautiful. Breathe through my garden and summon your fragrances, coram tus amores. So the lover is satisfied among the flowers. Beautiful. And there the sisters have beautifully depicted it. I am going to move on because I'm aware of the clock and I'm aware also that your lunch is coming and I don't want to get between you and your lunch. So we move on to, this is a later verse. My soul has enrolled itself and all its abundance in his service. I have no flock to tend,
nor any other office. For now, love alone is my exercise. Mi alma se ha empleado y todo mi caudal en su servicio. Ya no guardo ganado, ni ya tengo otro oficio que ya solo en amar es mi ejercicio. I mean, we could spend, a whole doctorate on this, and poor old Raphael is spending a whole doctorate on it. But just one word here, caudal. In English, I don't know what the Portuguese translated is. You'll hear it in a moment when Paulo recites the poem. In English, you'll find it translated as possessions, goods, and even energy. I go for abundance here. And the reason for that is abundance is a key term in the Upanishads. As many years as I can, I go to India, and there I sit with the Vedic hymns. And one of the ancient hymns with which the poems, the prayers begin, is in English, fullness there, fullness here. From fullness, we draw out fullness, and we are left with fullness. Unamada, unamidam, unamudatyate, unamadaya, unamasnim, unameva vashishyate. And that, I think, is what John is writing about here, this fullness that we move into at the very end of the poem. There we go. And there's a bit of Sanskrit at the bottom. And there he says, you will show me that which my soul has been seeking. And then you'll give me, there you'll give me my life, that which you gave me that other day. And from this point, I think, to the end of the poem, John lets the symbols and images take over as this thatness, he says, remains beyond conceptual discourse. We move beyond language. Language goes on holiday. We move into the images. For Teresa, we heard last night, this was the butterfly, the waters. For John, it's fire. Teresa is the mystic of the waters. John is the mystic of fire. And that is why, in a moment, I've got 2 minutes left. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Paolo to finish this talk with the poem, because I think we need to end with the poem. That's important. But just before I do that, I want to just quote again, if I can find it. Yeah, Constance Fitzgerald. And she writes, at this point in life and prayer development, the images of the poor, the victimized, the oppressed, the exploited, and the suffering take on a clarity and significance that is overpowering. They are the darkness of humanity. They are our darkness. Because, the end of all this mystical theology, it's not to create a holy huddle. It's not to have lovely, warm, mystical feelings. The end is to go out, to change the world, to transform the world, to relieve suffering. And I began the talk this afternoon with the suffering of the world, with the terrible conflicts that we are in. And I think at this point, if we have entered fully into John's narrative, as I have attempted to here, the search for spirituality stops being a parlour game for well-off, well-fed middle-class folk, but rather a call to action, to save our planet, our communities, our ecosystem, and by so doing, to save ourselves and find the happiness that is our birthright.
So thank you all very much. Obrigado. I'm now going to pass on to Paolo, who I'll just put up, there's my website and things. If you want to contact me, you're more than welcome. Like Raphael, anyone who contacts me out of the blue, they'll always get a response. I like the strange encounters of people. So Paolo, if you're ready, we can hear you recite the poem. And while you do it, I'll put up some of the images from the sisters. I've shown you some of the images, but not all of them. So as you talk, I'll put up some of the images. So away you go.
Hey, Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Thank you so much for your precious knowledge and all the details of the writing of this poem. It's really beautiful. And I don't think you can hear the people here, but I'm sure they're also thankful. And I'll start the reading now, okay?
And I'll put the images up as you go along.
Bom, vou ler o poema então em português. A tradução que eu tenho aqui é da editora Vozes. É uma tradução bem rebuscada, um português difícil. E é um poema longo, tá? Então, tenham paciência, por favor. Bom, o poema começa com a esposa falando, né, a alma. Onde é que te escondeste, amado, e me deixaste com gemido? Como o servo fugiste, havendo-me ferido, saí por ti clamando e eras já ido. Pastores que subirdes, além pelas malhadas ao outeiro, se porventura virdes aquele a quem mais quero, dizei-lhe que adoeço, peno e morro. Buscando meus amores, irei por estes montes e ribeiras, não colherei as flores, nem temerei as feras, e passarei os fortes e fronteiras. Pergunta às criaturas: ó bosques e espessuras, plantados pela mão de meu amado, ó prado de verduras, de flores esmaltado, dizei-me se por vós ele há passado. Resposta das criaturas: mil graças derramando, passou por estes soltos com presteza. E enquanto os ia olhando, só com sua figura, a todos revestiu de formosura. A esposa responde: quem poderá curar-me? Acaba de entregar-te já deveras. Não queiras enviar-me mais mensageiro algum, pois não sabem dizer-me o que desejo. E todos quantos vagam, de ti me vão mil graças relatando, e todos mais me chagam e deixa-me morrendo, não sei o que ficam balbuciando. Mas como perseveras, ó vida, não vivendo onde já vives? Se fazem com que morras as flechas que recebes daquilo que do amado em ti concebes? Porque, pois, has chagado este meu coração, o não saraste? E, já que mo has roubado, por que assim o deixaste e não tomas o roubo que roubaste? Extingue os meus anseios, porque ninguém os pode desfazer. E vejam-te meus olhos, pois deles és a luz, e para ti somente os quero ter. Mostra a tua presença, mate-me a tua vista e formosura. Olha que esta doença de amor jamais se cura, a não ser com a presença e com a figura. Ó cristalina fonte, se nesses teus semblantes prateados formasses de repente os olhos desejados que tenho nas entranhas debuxados. Aparta-os, meus amados, que eu alço o voo. Resposta do esposo: ó, volve-te, Columba, que o cervo vulnerado no alto do outeiro assoma, ao sopro do teu voo e fresco toma. A esposa responde: no amado acho as montanhas, os vales solitários, nemorosos, as ilhas mais estranhas, os rios rumorosos e o sussurro dos ares amorosos. A noite sossegada, quase aos levantes do raiar da aurora, a música calada, a solidão sonora, a ceia que recreia e que enamora. Caçai-nos as raposas, que está já toda em flor a nossa vinha, enquanto dessas rosas faremos uma pinha e ninguém apareça na colina. Detente, aquilão morto, vem, austro, que desperta os amores, aspira por meu horto, e corram seus olores, e o amado passeará por entre as flores. Ó ninfas da Judéia, enquanto pelas flores e rosais vai recendendo o âmbar, ficai nos arrabaldes e não ouseis tocar nossos umbrais. Esconde-te, querido, voltando tua face, olha as montanhas e não queiras dizê-lo, mas olha as companheiras de que vai pelas ilhas mais estranhas. O esposo responde: a vós, aves ligeiras, leões, cervos e gamos saltadores, montes, vales, ribeiras, águas, ventos, ardores, e das noites os medos veladores. Pelas amenas liras e cantos de sereias, vos conjuro que cessem vossas iras e não toqueis no muro, para a esposa dormir sono seguro. Entrou, enfim, a esposa, no horto ameno por ela desejado, e a seu sabor repousa o colo reclinado sobre os braços dulcíssimos do amado. Sob o pé da macieira, ali, comigo foste desposada, ali te dei a mão e foste renovada, onde a primeira mãe foi violada. A esposa responde: nosso leito é florido, de covas de leões entrelaçado, em púrpura estendido, de paz edificado, de 1000 escudos de ouro coroado. Após tuas pisadas, vão discorrendo as jovens no caminho, ao toque de centelha, ao temperado vinho, dando emissões de bálsamo divino. Na interior adega do amado meu bebi. Quando saía por toda aquela várzea, já nada mais sabia, e o rebanho perdi que antes seguia. Ali me abriu o peito, e a ciência me ensinou muito deleitosa, e a ele, em dom perfeito, me dei sem deixar coisa. Então lhe prometi ser sua esposa. Minha alma se há votado, com meu cabedal todo a teu serviço. Já não guardo mais gado, já não tenho outro ofício, que só amar é já meu exercício. Se agora, em meio à praça, já não for mais eu vista, nem achada, dizeis que me hei perdido. E andando enamorada, perdidiça me fiz e fui ganhada. De flores e esmeraldas, pelas frescas manhãs bem escolhidas, faremos as grinaldas em teu amor floridas, e num cabelo meu entretecidas. Só naquele cabelo, que em meu colo a voar consideraste, ao vê-lo no meu colo, nele preso ficaste, e num só dos meus olhos te chagaste. Quando tu me fitavas, teus olhos sua graça me infundiam, e assim me sobreamavas, e nisso mereciam meus olhos adorar o que em ti viam. Não queiras desprezar-me, porque, se cor trigueira em mim achaste, já podes ver-me agora, pois desde que me olhaste, a graça e a formosura em mim deixaste. Eis que a branca pombinha, para a arca com seu ramo, regressou, e feliz, a rolinha o par tão desejado, já nas ribeiras verdes encontrou. Em solidão vivia, em solidão seu ninho há já construído, e em solidão a guia, a sós, o seu querido, também na solidão de amor ferido. Gozemo-nos, amado, vamo-nos ver em tua formosura, no monte e na colina, onde brota a água pura, entremos mais adentro na espessura. E logo as mais subidas cavernas que há na pedra, buscaremos. Estão bem escondidas e juntos entraremos, e das romãs o mosto sorveremos. Ali me mostrarias aquilo que minha alma pretendia, e logo me darias, ali tu, vida minha, aquilo que me deste no outro dia. E o aspirar da brisa, de doce roxinol a voz amena, o solto e seu encanto, pela noite serena, com chama que consuma sem dar pena. Ali ninguém olhava, a minadade tampouco aparecia, o cerco sossegava, mesmo a cavalaria, só à vista das águas, já descia. That's it, Peter?
That's it.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good.